Hi everyone, I'm Melanie Hill, editor, poet, and author of middle grade novel Jet Cooper, and I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
And I am Valerie Francis. I'm an author and a story editor, and I teach writers how to craft a book so good that it hooks a reader on page one and never lets them go. All right, this is a little impromptu episode because I just heard an interview with Steven Spielberg, and I instantly sent the link to Melanie because he validated exactly what we're doing here on the podcast this season, no doubt. Now, I mean, I personally don't need the validation, and I know Melanie doesn't need it. We're already sold on this stuff. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this podcast. But in this interview, he's driving home our point, the points we are making specifically this season. And I kind of thought it would be of use to you guys, to all of you listening to the show here. So the interview is part of Spielberg's promotion for Disclosure Day, and it takes place with Rachel Abrams of The Daily with the New York Times. It's on YouTube if you want to look it up. It's an interesting interview, actually. In it, Abrams asks Spielberg to explain what makes a Spielberg film Spielbergian. And I know. As part of his answer, he says this, quote, "The first thing I look for is a very compelling premise. The second thing is a character we can hitch our wagons to, not a star, just a really great character. The two most important things, a premise and allowing the audience to identify. If you bond with and trust a character, you'll go on that ride, adventure or problem with them," end quote. This is exactly what we're talking about here in season 18. Melanie is studying the premise. I'm studying the four protagonist types and how audiences form a bond with each type. Now, I nearly fell off my chair when I heard Steven Spielberg say that. I mean, the timing could not be better. And so Melanie and I started to have a conversation offline about this. And we thought, well, why don't we just hit record um, so that you guys can hear our thoughts about this and so that we can all learn together. I mean, that's the whole point of the Story Nerd podcast in the first place. All right. So Melanie, let's start with, let's just take the topics one at a time, and let's start with the premise. Now, I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this because I have a hard time explaining to writers why they need to be able to describe in one sentence what their story is about. And I find that very often it's not until a writer has to sell the book that they realize how important being able to write the premise statement is, that they understand that this is an essential skill. And when I say sell the book, I mean, they could be looking for an agent. And if you are looking for an agent and you've used Query Tracker, you will see on, I'm not going to say all the agents' query pages, but the vast majority of them, they have a spot where you have to fill in your one sentence story summary. They expect it. And if you decide to go the indie publishing route, then you have to write the sales page for Amazon and Kobo and all the other online retailers. And you need a one sentence summary for that sales page. So we've got to be able to tell people what our stories are about in a way that is concise and compelling, right? And that's what the premise statement is. It is a concise and compelling summary of our story. So Melanie, tell me what your experience has been with this. I mean, I know you're not surprised to hear what Spielberg had to say, but when you're working with clients or you're talking to writers at, the various events that you go to and that you speak at, first of all, does it come up? Do you find resistance from writers about the need for a premise statement, or do you hear statements from them like, my story defies the one sentence summary? Like, there's so much going on, I can't possibly summarize it in a sentence. Like, how do you deal with it? And because maybe it's just me.
No, it's not just you. And Before I go on and talk about my experience, and this is a really compelling argument as to why you need to do it. If you listen just to the first 2 minutes of the interview where Rachel is introducing Steven Spielberg, so he hasn't even arrived in the studio yet, she does a couple of things. She says, and I quote, "This movie is about what would happen if the government revealed that we were not alone in the universe. How would you respond?" That is a one sentence summary, what if statement that drives the movie. And then she says, it's a movie about the government hiding information about aliens from the public. So, right there, as she is introducing one of the most famous and accomplished movie writers and directors of our time, she is using one sentence summaries to explain what this particular movie is about and why and what is interesting about it. So that is a perfect example of why it's important to have a one sentence summary so that it can be used in these types of situations. Then to go on to my experience, absolutely. Like this year, I've been doing lots of different events about my book and promoting my book. And the first thing that someone will come up to you if you're at a book fair or you're doing a library event is, well, what's this book about? And you don't have 30 minutes to go through every single subplot and every single thing that, is in the book. You've got to, at that point, hook them and make them curious so that they can ask you more questions about the book. So it becomes a conversation and not a one-way dialogue of you explaining in very convoluted terms about about your book and what themes it contains, who the characters are, and essentially what it's about. You have one sentence mostly to tell people about that. If you can't, then you'll lose them very quickly, right? They won't be interested and you won't get more conversation about the book itself. So that's a really practical application again of why you want a one sentence summary, whether it be a premise or a log line. The difference in the premise, we go through that in this season, but the premise has a sense of the ending, which is really helpful as a writer, whereas a log line is more of a question that leaves off the ending, sort of getting readers to or viewers to want more or find out more. So they're subtly different. But they both come from the same set of information, right, which is the 4 story questions, which you and I have talked about a lot. Now, I am writing the companion novel to my Jack Cooper novel at the moment, and I have a one sentence premise because that is what I keep referring back to, especially when I go off track, right? And, we all have those moments where our characters start doing things that we don't want them to do, or they go over here and you actually want them to be over there. And so referring back to that summary sentence is really important in my mind to keep me on the straight and narrow as I go through and write my novel. So I find it invaluable. And then when I'm working with clients, especially when they are doing the same thing, their characters are going a bit rogue, they're going off track, I use that to bring my clients back to their story and the spine of their story. So the one thing that the story is about, because that should be the spine of your story, right? And just to remind them that if they get this right, if they get their one thing the story is about right when they go through and write that draft, everything else will fall into place. So that's how I use it myself, because it's a great tool, and how I use it with clients to help them guide them as they're writing their drafts. Particularly in a developmental edit, but also if my clients can't explain to me in one sentence what their story is about, that's a really telling sign that there's probably going to be problems in the manuscript as well. So I use that as a bit of a diagnostic to begin with, when I'm listening to my clients talk to me about their story, and if they can't explain it, then yeah, it's probably going to come out in the text when I go through and do an analysis. But what about you? Have you had that experience as well, like trying to bring writers back to that premise? And can you see, like you said, we know that Spielberg does it. We can see it in the interview, and we understand the value of it. Do you have trouble explaining that to your clients, why they need it and what it's about?
Yes. We have said right from the very beginning that a story is about one thing. And the fact that people are so confused by this tells me that I'm not explaining myself very well. So I am endeavoring to clarify what I mean and to explain it better, which is kind of why I got so excited when I heard Spielberg say it, because I'm like, well, okay, it's not just me making it up. I'm not just saying this over here because I'm trying to drum up business at all. We look at the pro storytellers. I mean, he's at the top of the heap, right? What does he look for? The first thing is a compelling premise. The second is a main character that evokes some kind of an emotion. And we just happened to have picked those two topics this season to talk about because they're so important. When we say that a story is about one thing, my fear, and I don't know if this is true, Melanie, but my concern, my fear is that writers think that I am that if they articulate that their story is about one thing, that it's somehow dumbing down their story or
Mhm.
simplifying their story when they are so involved in their story. And this is what happens to us as writers. I mean, we're right down in the weeds in our story. We know all our characters, we know all the plots and the subplots, and we know them all inside out, upside down, backwards and forwards. And so we can kind of lose the forest for the trees a little bit. When we say that a story is about one thing, we're talking about being able to articulate the main plot line in a way that is interesting. It doesn't mean there can't be subplots. It doesn't mean that there can't be multiple themes. It means being able to zero in on the main plot of your story, which forms the spine of your story, in a way that, when you're out at a party and someone finds out you're a writer, they're going to be interested. I guarantee you they're going to be interested. Whenever anyone finds out I'm a writer, all they want to talk about is books. And invariably, they tell me that they would love to write a book. And the only thing that gets them off the topic of uh, being a writer and them wanting to write and asking me about writing and that kind of stuff is when they find out I'm a power lifter. And then suddenly all they want to talk about is powerlifting. um, but when you're out at an event and someone finds out you're a writer and they say, well, what kind of books do you write? Like, what's your last book about? That's an opportunity for you to sell a book, to get a fan, to get a reader. And that's how you build an audience, one reader at a time. And I know nobody likes to talk about selling and money, and somehow it's beneath us all, and we're writing great literature, and that's beyond us. Well, I'm sorry, it isn't, because it is a business. You can write great literature, and if your goal is to write it and share it with your friends and family, do it. Absolutely do it. It's when a writer's goal is to be published. That's when you have to start thinking about the market and the marketplace, um, and and understanding that your job is to sell the books. If nothing else, you've got to sell one to an agent, right? You've got to sell the agent on the idea of signing you. That's a sales job right there, and it's an uncomfortable topic. No one likes to talk about sales, because we're writers, right? We may or may not ever have sold anything in our lives, and it can feel kind of smarmy and all that kind of stuff. But we have to accept that that's part of our job. And if selling the book means convincing someone that your book is so interesting that they want to get a copy to see what it's like, or in your case, Melanie, where you've written a middle grade book, they've got to buy a Christmas gift for a kid on their list, or
Mhm.
their kid's going to a birthday party or something, and they need to buy a gift for a kid, and a book would be a great gift for a kid. Um, that's what you're trying to convince them to do. So, just like you said, this whole idea of being able to articulate your story in one concise, compelling statement, the premise statement, is vital when you're writing the story because it keeps you on track.
Mm.
And the book that I'm currently working on right now is a brand new book because Immortal is done. Alleluia. Praise the little baby Jesus. It is done. But when I started my new book, the first thing I did was write the premise statement. I wrote out the 4 story questions, and I didn't know the answers to all of them. Or I wasn't very concise. I wasn't very specific on all of them because this was a new story, right? So I wrote what I had and I started working with what I had. And then the answers to those questions started to come into focus as I started to work on the book, right? I didn't do that with Immortal. And
Mhm.
that was one of the problems I had and why I ended up throwing out 2 versions of it before I got to the 3rd one. So having a premise statement is going to help you with the writing of the book. It's also going to help you explain the book to other people, which is what you need to be able to do if you want to have your book published and if you want to be a career author. Even if you don't want to have your book published and you expect anybody to read your book, your friends and family, you still have to explain to them what your book is about, because it's easier to get someone to buy your book than it is to get someone to read your book. And you can't have a career as a writer unless people are reading your book and telling their friends about it and waiting for your next book, anticipating your next book. Anyway,
Mm.
so that's what I have to say about the premise statement.
Well, do you know what else was really interesting in the interview that brought me back to thinking about the premise was when Steven Spielberg was talking about how he and George Lucas came up with the idea of Indiana Jones and the oh god, now like my brain is not working. the
The Raiders of the Lost Ark?
No, not the Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was the first one when they are talking about the one with his father, The Last
Right,
Crusade.
yes.
The
Yep,
Last
The Last
Crusade.
Crusade.
Yeah. And he goes on to say that George Lucas says, I want to make an Indiana Jones movie where they go after the cup of Christ, right? Which is the cup of eternal life, apparently. This is not unusual because that's what Indiana Jones does, right? He goes around looking for or trying to steal back very powerful religious or items, that have been artifacts that have been stolen to be used for nefarious purposes. That's not surprising. But then Spielberg goes, that's great, but why don't we have Indy's father as the one who's been doing the research on the Grail, and he and Indy are estranged and they have a meeting of hearts. So again, they're actually speaking in premise terms, right? They're speaking in one sentence summary terms about how they want to develop the movie. So I found that equally as fascinating. But I think what that also links to then is the characters. So Indiana Jones, very well-known character. We kind of know he's a bit of he's a normal person, but he's a bit of a superhero in that he, has skills in his archaeology and his action hero utility belt that he pulls out. But what this does when they talk about his father coming in is that it makes the story more universal because now you have intergenerational conflict. And so I think that speaks to your topic this season about the type of protagonists. And now, while Indy's father is a bit of an antagonist, he is not antagonistic in a way that we don't have empathy. So now we kind of, in that movie, have almost like you equally love the protagonist and the antagonist in their interpersonal relationships, as well as the fact that they're both fighting a common enemy. And I think that that again is really powerful, that both of those very good storytellers have a premise. And then the next thing, once they've kind of nailed that down, is that they move that into the protagonist or character space. So then I'm going to ask you, how do you then, like knowing that's what we're talking about, have you chosen your protagonists and how have you given them qualities like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg do? And how do you do that with your clients to make them develop that character that we can hitch our wagons to?
I really like that as as an explanation, a character we can hitch our wagons to, not a
Yeah.
star, just a really great character. Because if you bond with the character, you'll go on the ride, you'll go on the adventure, right? You'll go with them, which is absolutely true. And, Melanie, I blame character sheets because there's all of these character sheets, and I'm sure every one of us has come across them where the God, I think I even did these in grade school, where you're writing about your character, but it's all of the superficial things.
Mhm.
It's their hair color, it's their eye color, it's what they do for a living, it's what they eat for breakfast. There's in some of them, there's even a spot for you to copy and paste a picture of a Hollywood star that you think your character's like, and it's very much a focus on that. And you know what? Depending on the story that you're writing, that could be important. What the character looks like, their physical abilities or disabilities could be really important. However, it's far more interesting for a reader and frankly for a writer who's writing a story, because you're going to be working on this book for a while. The main character is the reader's or viewer's stand-in. It's their avatar. So Indiana Jones is a great example, right? Like, we all want to be Indiana Jones and be that cool. He is a hero type character. We
Mm.
aspire to be like that, where, but he's not infallible because he doesn't like snakes,
Mhm.
right? So we understand that. We empathize with it. Totally. I don't like snakes either. And and the fact that even though he's brave and does all these adventures, ev the fact that he doesn't like snakes, we can empathize with because it makes him more relatable as a hero
Mhm.
type character. It brings him closer to us, and the fact that he, um, he's really bad at romantic relationships, right?
Yep.
He doesn't do them well at all. Well, we can empathize with that too. That's not the kind of guy he is. Um, so I thinking about the 4 types of protagonists is I have found a very different way for most writers to consider their main character, because they're used to explaining their main character in terms of their name, maybe their job, whether they're married or not, or if they have kids or not, those types of superficial things. But they're not used to considering whether their character is an everyman, every woman, or an
Mhm.
underdog, or a hero, or an anti-hero. And and it can seem at first like another obstacle to finishing the book. Right? Like, oh, I just want to write the book. I don't want to have to stop and figure all this out. And I get it. Totally, I get it. And all this theory stuff, listen, it's great. Sometimes it can get in the way. I freely admit that sometimes I just put all of the theory aside and I sit down and I write. And I don't worry about any theory and I don't worry about whether this is, quote unquote, right or wrong. I just write because the only thing the first draft has to do is exist. And then I will go back with my red pen and my editor hat on and figure out what can stay, what needs to go, what needs to be strengthened, all that kind of stuff. But when you consider your protagonist and the type of person they are, hero, anti-hero, underdog, everyman, right away you have a strategy for how to get your reader to connect with them.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this season. And one of the points that you made was that it gives you a way, it gives you it's not prescriptive, but it gives you the thing that you need to hook onto when you think about, well, this is my character. So my character's in every woman and every boy and every girl and every man or whatever flavor, it doesn't matter, but they're just average person. How do I then, that's an easier, potentially easier job to do to create empathy. It's could be even easier with an underdog. It's more difficult with a superhero type of person. But like you said, giving them something that makes them fallible, that reduces their strength, all of those things make them relatable. Like I just went and saw the Supergirl movie this week with my daughter, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because I loved that Supergirl was messy. She was, the movie starts with her in a really messy state. She's not, but she's not hurting anybody. She's not, she's just doing what she's doing, but she's messy. So there's a humanness to her that I really, really connected with. It's because she's having a couple of years, and that's made her very messy. But she's also deep down a caring person, despite the fact that she's got these superpowers. The superpowers are secondary to her. So it was a really nice way to empathize or see that character's humanity first before you actually get introduced to her superpowers. So I love that your topic is giving us a way to choose a character, understand them, and then know how to create empathy for them within a story. And again, it's no coincidence, right, that this is what Steven Spielberg does. It's no coincidence that he loves a good premise, and then a character. And if you look at a lot of the characters in his movies, he has a lot of the every person in them. There are very few superhero things that he has done, and he puts them in really interesting situations to bring out the best or the worst of them. So we shouldn't be surprised, even though I think both of us were really excited when we did see the video and go, oh my God, this just happens to be what we're talking about by coincidence this season. But then when I thought about it, I thought, well, no, that makes a lot of sense. If they have a good premise and they have a character that people can attach to or understand and go on the journey with, that's the start. That is the start at the pinnacle of your storytelling tree. Everything else then falls out of that. So I think what we can do is we can say, well, if Steven Spielberg does it, then, you can do it too.
If
And he
it's good enough
didn't.
for Spielberg, it's good enough for us.
That's right. And he has not, he has used that throughout his whole career. This is not something he's started to, now that he's 70 or so, that he's just found out. These are things that he has tested through a career of 50 years of making movies and telling stories. So he doesn't say it lightly. And so therefore, if you ever need a compelling argument as to understand why you need these things, the proof is in the pudding.
I wouldn't mind having a career like Spielberg's. I wouldn't mind being known as a storyteller, someone who tells stories that are that good,
Yeah.
and if his starting point is a compelling premise and a protagonist that we can hook our wagons to, then You know, we would be, I think, fools not to pay attention to the premise of our story and to learning to develop the skill of articulating it in a concise, compelling sentence. And we might not be able to do it the first time. That's okay. It's a skill.
Mm,
The more you practice it, the easier it'll get. And if you practice it with movies, it's a lot easier than on your own book. Because a movie you can watch several times in a weekend. And if it's already made it to to a completed film stage, chances are somebody came up with a compelling premise statement, and you can do exactly what Melanie is doing on the podcast this season. Looking at what's on IMDb, what's on the iTunes description, and comparing that to what you've come up with. So it's a skill like any other skill. If you practice it, you get better at it, and then you get to apply it to your own work. I mean, I don't know what else to say. If this is how the best of the best are approaching stories, why wouldn't we do it too?
absolutely. Yeah, I think so too. All right. Well, that wraps it up for this bonus episode of the Story Nerd podcast. To support our show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want us to review your query letter and the first 10 pages of a writing sample, go to storynerd.ca for all the details about how to submit. To get your free first 10 pages checklist, visit valeriefrancis.ca/checklist. And for more information about my books, visit me at melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.